I was born in the Imperial Naval Archives on Coruscant, though not in the way most people are born. Not in the biological sense, but in the sense that a person becomes who they truly are. My actual birth happened 37 years earlier on Corellia, in a modest district where shipwrights and dock workers raised their families within sight of the orbital shipyards. My mother worked inventory control for the Republic Navy during the Clone Wars. My father died at the Battle of Coruscant, a turbo-laser gunner aboard the Integrity, when Grievous's fleet tore through the planetary defenses. I was 4 years old. I don't remember his face, only my mother's expression when the officers came to our door with their condolences and his service medal. My mother never remarried. She poured everything into her work, and by extension, into me. She taught me that the galaxy ran on information, not the dramatic kind, not intelligence reports or battle plans, but the mundane, essential data that kept fleets supplied, crews fed, ships maintained. Numbers don't lie, she told me constantly, her fingers dancing across inventory manifests. People lie, politicians lie, but if you track the numbers, you see the truth underneath everything. I grew up in archives and warehouses, doing homework in supply depots while my mother cross-referenced requisition orders. Other children played with holoprojectors and dreamed of being Jedi or pilots. I learned double-entry bookkeeping and how to spot discrepancies in shipping logs. By the time I was 12, I could identify fraudulent procurement requests just by analyzing timing patterns. By 15, I'd helped my mother uncover a corruption ring that had been siphoning military supplies for 3 years. That investigation brought us to the attention of the newly formed Imperial Navy. The Republic had just become the Empire. The Clone Wars had ended, and the new government was systematically auditing all military operations. My mother's work was exemplary, precise, thorough, uncorrupted by the chaos of the transition. They offered her a position in the Imperial Naval Archives on Coruscant, a promotion that came with better housing, better pay, and better opportunities for her son. She accepted. We moved to Coruscant when I was 16, leaving behind everything familiar for the gleaming towers of the Imperial Center. My mother thrived. I watched her transform from a tired warehouse supervisor into a senior archivist, responsible for maintaining comprehensive records of every capital ship movement in the Imperial Navy. She had access to classified data streams, real-time fleet positions, strategic deployment schedules. She knew where every Star Destroyer was, where it was going, and why. "This is power," she told me one evening, standing in our apartment overlooking the endless cityscape. Not the power to give orders, but the power to know if those orders are being followed. The Emperor commands the fleet, but we record its truth. I enrolled in the Imperial Academy at 18, not for military service, but for the administrative track, the bureaucrats and analysts who kept the war machine functioning. I was good at it, better than good. I had inherited my mother's gift for seeing patterns in data, for understanding the invisible architecture of logistics that undergirded every military operation. While my classmates studied tactical doctrine and command theory, I studied information systems, classification protocols, archival methodology. I graduated second in my class. The Naval Archives recruited me immediately. At 22 years old, I became a junior records analyst, working in the same department as my mother, maintaining the official history of the Imperial Navy's movements. It was everything I'd trained for, everything I'd wanted. I had purpose, I had meaning. I was helping maintain order in a galaxy that had nearly torn itself apart during the Clone Wars. My mother died 6 months later. Heart failure, sudden and unexpected. One moment she was reviewing fleet deployment schedules. The next, she collapsed at her workstation. They told me it was quick, painless, a mercy. I held her service medal, the same one they'd given her for my father's death, and understood for the first time how thoroughly the Empire consumed its servants. I threw myself into work. It was all I had left. I processed fleet movement reports, cross-referenced them with official naval records, maintained the comprehensive database that allowed High Command to track every asset in their vast armada. The work was meditative, almost spiritual. Ships moved through the galaxy in predictable patterns, following orders, executing missions, returning to port. I documented it all, creating an unbroken narrative of Imperial naval power. That's when I noticed the discrepancy. It was small, the kind of thing 99% of analysts would dismiss as clerical error. A fleet movement report from Sector Command referenced battle group designation Phantom 7, 8 Victory-class Star Destroyers and supporting vessels conducting anti-piracy operations in the Outer Rim. Standard deployment, standard mission profile, nothing unusual, except when I cross-referenced it with the Master Fleet Registry, Phantom 7 didn't exist. No commissioning orders, no crew assignments, no maintenance schedules, no supply requisitions. 8 Star Destroyers that had apparently been operating for 3 months without leaving any archival footprint beyond that single fleet movement report. I assumed it was a data entry error. Someone had transposed a designation code, or the report had been tagged with incorrect metadata. I filed a correction request and moved on. But 2 weeks later, another report appeared. Phantom 7 had engaged pirate forces near Ryloth, destroyed several raider corvettes, and continued its patrol sweep. Again, no corresponding records, no battle damage assessments, no casualty reports, no after-action documentation. I began investigating properly. I pulled every reference to Phantom 7 I could find. There were 7 reports over 4 months, all describing routine operations, all lacking any supporting documentation. I searched personnel databases for crew rosters. Nothing. I checked shipyard records for construction orders. Nothing. I reviewed strategic deployment schedules from Sector Command. Phantom 7 appeared on movement logs but never on operational planning documents. It was as if someone was generating fake reports about a fleet that didn't exist, or hiding all supporting documentation for a fleet that did exist. Neither explanation made sense. The Imperial Navy was obsessively bureaucratic. Every bolt, every credit, every personnel transfer was documented in triplicate. Ships didn't simply appear in operational reports without existing in the archives. I took my findings to my supervisor, Commander Arlen, a career naval officer who'd transitioned to archival work after losing an arm at the Battle of Kashyyyk. He listened to my presentation with the patient expression of someone who'd heard this before. Classification, he said simply. Phantom 7 is operating under security protocols that restrict archival documentation. The movement reports are sanitized versions for lower clearance tracking systems. The actual operational details are classified above your access level. But sir, I have obsidian clearance. I process fleet movements for the entire Navy. What classification level exceeds that? He gave me a look I couldn't quite interpret. Sympathy. Warning. There are always higher levels, Virain. Projects that require complete operational security, assets that can't appear in standard archives because their missions are too sensitive. You're not cleared to know more than that. File the reports. Don't dig deeper and trust that people above our level have good reasons for the classification. I should have listened. My mother had taught me that sometimes discrepancies existed for legitimate reasons, that not every irregularity was corruption or conspiracy. But I'd also watched her uncover actual fraud by refusing to accept convenient explanations. The question gnawed at me. Why would the Empire need a ghost fleet? I started investigating off the record, I couldn't access the classified documentation directly, but I could analyze the patterns around it. The movement reports for Phantom 7 always came from the same source, a sector command office in the expansion region. I pulled reports from that same office about other fleets and compared them. Phantom 7's reports were subtly different. The language was slightly more formal, the mission descriptions more generic. The timestamps always fell on specific intervals that didn't match standard reporting schedules. They were fake. Or rather, they were deliberately constructed to look like operational reports while revealing nothing of substance. Someone was maintaining the fiction of Phantom 7's existence, ensuring it appeared in enough places to seem real, but never providing details that could be verified or investigated. I expanded my search. If Phantom 7 was a fiction, were there others? I wrote a data analysis program that scanned millions of fleet movement reports, looking for similar patterns, designations that appeared in movement logs but nowhere else, reports with matching linguistic quirks, timestamps that fell into suspicious patterns. The program ran for 3 days. When it finished, I stared at the results with growing horror. Phantom 7 wasn't alone. There were 43 ghost fleets in the Imperial Navy, comprising over 300 star destroyers and thousands of support vessels. All of them appeared in movement reports, sometimes engaging pirates or rebels, sometimes conducting patrol operations, sometimes performing fleet exercises. None of them existed in any verifiable archive. They were phantoms, fictional fleets being documented as if they were real, their reports flowing into official records where analysts like me dutifully filed them without ever questioning their existence. 300 star destroyers. That was nearly a quarter of the entire Imperial Navy, at least according to official estimates. Except if these ghost fleets were fictional, that meant the actual Imperial Navy was significantly smaller than the Empire claimed. We'd been documenting ships that didn't exist, reporting fleet strength that was inflated by hundreds of capital vessels. Or, and this possibility was somehow worse, the ships were real, but their actual operations were so classified that the Empire had created an entire parallel documentation system. The reports I was seeing were cover stories, sanitized narratives that hid whatever these ghost fleets were actually doing. Either explanation was devastating. Either the Empire was lying about its naval strength, or it was conducting massive secret operations using a quarter of its fleet while maintaining elaborate false records. I didn't know what to do. Reporting this to Commander Arlen seemed pointless. He'd either been ignorant of it and would panic, or he'd known about it and would consider my investigation a security violation. Going to Naval Intelligence, or ISB, would likely get me arrested for accessing information I wasn't authorized to synthesize in this way. But doing nothing meant being complicit in whatever deception this represented. I thought about my mother, about her conviction that numbers revealed truth. She'd taught me to follow the data wherever it led, to trust in documentation and precision. But what did you do when the documentation itself was compromised? When the numbers were deliberately falsified? I made copies of everything. Every ghost fleet designation, every suspicious report, every pattern my analysis had revealed. I encrypted it, hid it in my personal storage, and then did something that terrified me. I kept working normally. I filed reports, processed fleet movements, maintained the archives, as if I'd discovered nothing. I became complicit in the deception, documenting fictional fleets alongside real ones, perpetuating the lie through my silence. But I also kept investigating, carefully, slowly, using only tools and access I legitimately possessed. I tried to understand what the ghost fleets actually represented. I couldn't access the classified operational data, but I could analyze the patterns of their reported activities, where they appeared, when they engaged enemies, what they supposedly accomplished. The patterns were strange. Ghost fleets rarely operated in the core worlds or inner rim. They concentrated in the outer rim and unknown regions, places where Imperial authority was contested, where fleets needed to project power against pirates, slavers, and rebel cells. Their reported engagements were always successful but never decisive. They destroyed raider groups, disrupted smuggling operations, suppressed local rebellions. Exactly the kind of operations that justified maintaining large fleet deployments in those regions. I realized what I was looking at. The ghost fleets weren't covering secret operations. They were justifying operational budgets. The Empire was documenting fictional fleets to inflate its naval presence in regions where it actually had minimal coverage. Instead of admitting that 300 star destroyers couldn't simultaneously patrol every contested system in the Outer Rim, Naval Command was simply inventing fleets to fill the gaps on paper. It was a massive fraud, but not the kind I'd initially feared. Not some dark conspiracy or secret military operation, just bureaucratic deception, the Empire lying to itself about its own capabilities, maintaining the fiction of overwhelming force, because admitting their actual limitations would undermine Imperial authority. I felt simultaneously relieved and disgusted. Relieved because I wasn't uncovering some nightmare project, no superweapons or secret death fleets. Disgusted because this might be worse. This was institutional rot. The Empire's naval command falsifying records to hide the fact that they couldn't actually maintain control over the territories they'd claimed. And I was helping them do it. Every report I filed, every ghost fleet movement I documented, I was participating in the lie. That's when the summons came. A nondescript message in my terminal. Report to Naval Intelligence Section 7, Office of Internal Review, immediately. No explanation, no context. Just a time and location in a sector of the Imperial Center I'd never visited. I'd been discovered. Someone had noticed my analysis program, or my access patterns, or the data I'd copied. I walked to the appointment convinced I was about to be arrested, possibly disappeared into some ISB detention center where analysts who knew too much went to be forgotten. The office was small, austere, occupied by a single man in a captain's uniform with naval intelligence insignia. He was older, maybe 60, with the kind of face that had spent decades keeping secrets. He gestured for me to sit. "Virain Kellis," he said, reading from a datapad. 7 years in the Naval Archives, excellent performance reviews, recently conducted an unauthorized analysis of fleet documentation patterns. Do you know why you're here? Yes, sir, I said, deciding that honesty was my only option. I discovered discrepancies in fleet movement reports, ghost fleets that exist in operational logs but nowhere else. I assumed it was either classification or falsification. I was trying to determine which. And what did you conclude? That Naval Command is documenting fictional fleets to inflate reported strength in contested regions, that approximately 300 capital ships in official records don't actually exist. He nodded slowly, unsurprised. That's a very serious accusation, one that could be interpreted as treasonous criticism of Imperial naval capabilities. I have documentation, sir, statistical analysis, pattern matching, comparative. I know, I've reviewed it. Your analysis is correct. The admission shocked me into silence. He continued, his expression unchanging. The ghost fleets exist because the Emperor requires them to exist, not physically, but conceptually. The Empire maintains order through the perception of overwhelming force. When systems believe we have unlimited resources, infinite fleets, they don't resist. They comply. They accept Imperial authority because fighting seems futile. But if they knew the truth, that we have roughly 75% of the fleet strength we claim, then rebellions increase. Governors get ambitious. Entire sectors start questioning whether they need Imperial protection. So we lie, I said quietly. We maintain necessary fictions. The galaxy is vast, Kellis. We can't possibly patrol every system simultaneously, but we can make every system believe we might arrive at any moment. Ghost fleets give us omnipresence without the resource cost. Sector governors report to their populations that an Imperial fleet is nearby, maintaining security. Local pirate groups hear that Battle Group Phantom 7 destroyed their competitors and think twice about raiding shipping lanes. Rebel cells believe the Empire's grip is tighter than it actually is and lose hope. The documentation creates the reality. But it's fraud, I said. We're falsifying official military records. We're managing perception. Every government does it. The Republic did it during the Clone Wars. Do you think they reported actual casualty figures? The Separatists? This is how power functions at galactic scale. Truth becomes whatever enough people believe, and we control what they believe by controlling what's documented. He leaned forward, studying me with those experienced eyes. You have 3 options, Kellis. First, you can accept what I've told you, return to your work, and continue processing reports without questioning their authenticity. Second, you can request reassignment to another department. Forget what you've discovered and we'll ensure your career continues without incident. Third, you can refuse both options, in which case this conversation becomes a security matter and you'll be detained pending investigation. Those aren't really options, I said. No, he agreed. They're not. But I'm giving you the courtesy of choice because your analysis impressed several people in naval intelligence. You have the kind of mind that sees patterns others miss. That's valuable. We'd prefer to retain you rather than silence you. I thought about my mother, about her conviction that numbers don't lie. But she'd been wrong. Numbers lie constantly when the people recording them choose to falsify them. The entire foundation of my profession, objective documentation, archival truth, was compromised by institutional deception. If I stay, I said slowly, and continue processing these reports, I'm complicit in the fraud. You're complicit in maintaining Imperial order, the stability that keeps trillions of beings safe from the chaos that nearly destroyed the galaxy during the Clone Wars. Is absolute archival honesty worth risking that stability? I wanted to say yes. I wanted to believe that truth mattered more than consequences, that documentation should be inviolate regardless of political considerations. But I also remembered the Clone Wars, the destruction and suffering, the sense that civilization itself was collapsing. If lies prevented that from happening again, were they justified? I'll stay, I heard myself say. I'll continue my work. The captain nodded, unsurprised. Good. But understand this, Kellis. You now carry classified knowledge. You know the ghost fleets exist, which means you're a security risk if you ever leave Imperial service. Naval intelligence will be monitoring your activities, your communications, your associations. Step out of line once. Show any indication you might reveal what you know, and our previous courtesy will be rescinded. Are we clear? Yes, sir. Dismissed. I returned to the Naval Archives and continued my work, documenting ghost fleets alongside real ones, maintaining the Empire's necessary fiction. But something had broken inside me. Every report I processed felt like a betrayal of everything my mother had taught me. Every principle I'd built my career on. The numbers were lying and I was helping them lie. Months passed. I became more efficient, more detached, processing reports without thinking about their authenticity. I stopped caring whether the fleets were real, whether the battles happened, whether any of it meant anything. I was a component in the machine, converting raw data into official history, and the truth of that history was irrelevant to its function. Then came the first reports of Scarif. The battle itself was classified, details restricted to the highest levels of command. But the aftermath generated documentation, casualty reports, damage assessments, fleet movement logs. A rebel cell had infiltrated the Imperial security complex on Scarif, stolen classified data, and escaped despite overwhelming Imperial forces. The Death Star had been deployed to destroy the facility and eliminate all evidence. I processed the reports mechanically, noting the losses: multiple Star Destroyers, thousands of personnel, the entire planetary garrison. Another data point in the endless stream of Imperial military operations. But then I noticed something that made my blood freeze. 3 of the destroyed Star Destroyers at Scarif were from ghost fleets. The Dominion, the Reprisal, and the Vicissitude. All 3 had belonged to Phantom 12, a ghost fleet I'd been documenting for 2 years. Ships that supposedly didn't exist had somehow been destroyed in combat, which meant either they'd always been real and their classification was even more complex than I'd understood, or someone had scrambled to create cover stories for actual ships by attributing them to fictional fleets. I started pulling reports, tracing backwards through documentation. The 3 ships had appeared in Phantom 12's movement logs for 18 months, always operating in the Outer Rim, engaging in routine anti-piracy operations, standard Ghost Fleet fiction. But now they were confirmed destroyed at Scarif, with verified debris fields, confirmed casualties, named officers in memoriam reports. They'd been real. Real ships, real crews, real operations, but documented as fictional, hidden in ghost fleets while they conducted actual missions. And now they were dead, sacrificed at Scarif, and the only archival trace of their existence was in reports I'd been filing as part of the Empire's deception. I felt sick. Those crews had families, people who deserved to know their service was real, that their deaths meant something. But official records would show they'd served on fictional ships, part of ghost fleets, their sacrifice buried in layers of classification and deception. I started investigating more carefully, cross-referencing ghost fleet reports with confirmed Imperial operations. The pattern was horrifying. Dozens of ghost fleet ships appeared in actual battle reports, engaged in real combat, suffering real casualties. The ghost fleets weren't just bureaucratic fictions, they were cover identities for actual vessels conducting operations so classified that the Empire couldn't acknowledge them officially. What kind of operations required that level of secrecy? What were these ships actually doing that the Empire needed to hide their existence, even from its own archives? I thought about the captain's explanation: maintaining perception, creating omnipresence through documentation. That was part of it, yes, but not all of it. Some ghost fleet ships were real, conducting real missions, and those missions were classified at levels that exceeded even Obsidian clearance. I needed to know. Not because I thought I could change anything, not because I had any illusions about stopping the Empire's deceptions, but because I couldn't live with processing reports about dead crews without understanding why their deaths were being hidden. I began the most dangerous investigation of my life. Using my legitimate archival access, I started mapping Ghost Fleet operations against known Imperial strategic priorities. Where did the real Ghost Fleet ships operate? When did they engage in combat? What patterns emerged from their classified missions? The analysis took 6 months of careful, cautious work. I processed my regular assignments during work hours, then spent nights running analysis programs, correlating data, building comprehensive maps of Ghost Fleet activities. I told no one. I used personal equipment, encrypted everything, left no traces in official systems. What I discovered made me wish I'd never started investigating. The real Ghost Fleet ships, the ones that actually existed beneath their fictional identities, concentrated in specific regions, not random Outer Rim patrols, specific systems, specific coordinates, places that appeared frequently in their operational reports, places where the Empire had experienced unexplained losses, missing patrols, disappeared vessels. I cross-referenced those coordinates against other classified data I had access to: incident reports, navigational warnings, restricted space designations. The pattern crystallized with horrifying clarity. The Ghost Fleet ships were being sent to investigate phenomena the Empire couldn't explain or control. Anomalies, disappearances, incidents like the one I'd heard rumors about. The collector entities that had been taking Imperial ships in the expansion region. The Empire was using ghost fleets as expendable investigation teams, sending real ships with real crews to confront threats that couldn't be officially acknowledged. If the ships succeeded in their investigations, their findings were classified beyond normal Imperial documentation, buried in archives I'd never seen. If they failed, if they disappeared, or were destroyed, they were already documented as fictional, and their loss could be ignored without raising questions about Imperial capability. The crews never knew. They thought they were serving on normal Imperial vessels, conducting normal operations. But they'd been designated expendable, assigned to Ghost Fleet identities, sent into situations where their deaths wouldn't require official explanation or mourning. It was monstrous, efficient, strategically logical, and absolutely monstrous. I sat in my apartment surrounded by data, understanding finally why naval intelligence monitored me so carefully. This wasn't just about falsified records or inflated fleet strength. This was about the Empire sacrificing its own personnel to maintain the illusion that it controlled the galaxy absolutely, that nothing existed beyond its understanding, that no threats could challenge Imperial power. The ghost fleets let them dispose of uncomfortable evidence. Ships that encountered phenomena the Empire couldn't explain simply disappeared into fictional identities, their crews erased from official history, their discoveries buried in classification so deep that even their existence was deniable. I thought about the crews at Scarif, documented as part of Phantom 12. Had they known they were expendable? Had they understood that their service was considered so problematic, so politically inconvenient, that the Empire had erased them even before they died? I couldn't report this, couldn't expose it. Naval intelligence had made clear what would happen if I revealed classified information. And who would I tell? The Empire controlled all official channels. The rebels might care, but how would I contact them without being detected? I was trapped in knowledge, unable to act on it, unable to forget it. That's when the second Death Star exploded. News of the Battle of Endor arrived like a shockwave through the Imperial center. The Emperor dead, Vader dead, the Death Star destroyed, the fleet shattered. The Empire didn't collapse immediately. Institutions that massive don't simply vanish, but the certainty, the overwhelming conviction that Imperial power was eternal and absolute, died at Endor, and with it died the necessity of ghost fleets. In the chaos following Endor, as the Empire fragmented into competing warlord factions, as systems declared independence and the Rebel Alliance transformed into the New Republic, the naval archives descended into pandemonium. Officers demanded records to support competing territorial claims. Warlords wanted proof of fleet assets they could commandeer. The New Republic requested documentation for war crimes investigations. I watched the institution I'd served collapse into factional infighting, each side demanding I prove their legitimacy through archival records. And I realized I had a choice now, a real choice that I'd never had while the Empire stood united. I could reveal the ghost fleets, all of them, the fictional ships, the real ships hidden in fictional identities, the crews sacrificed to maintain Imperial deceptions. I could compile everything I'd discovered and release it to the New Republic, to independent journalists, to anyone who would listen. The truth my mother had believed in, the documentation she'd considered sacred, I could finally honor her memory by exposing how thoroughly it had been corrupted, or I could destroy it, erase the Ghost Fleet documentation entirely, purge the records so that future historians wouldn't even know they'd existed. The crews who died as expendable investigation teams could be remembered as heroes who fell in service to the Empire, not as disposable assets sacrificed to bureaucratic convenience. Their families could believe their service mattered, that they died fighting rebels at Scarif rather than investigating phenomena the Empire found inconvenient. Both options felt like betrayal. Both options required me to choose between types of truth: archival accuracy versus narrative mercy. I thought about my mother's last words to me, spoken in the hospital before her heart finally stopped. The numbers don't lie, but people need more than numbers. They need meaning. I made my decision. I spent 3 days compiling a comprehensive report on the ghost fleets. Every designation, every pattern, every analysis I'd conducted over the years. I documented the fictional inflation of fleet strength, the use of ghost identities to hide classified operations, the sacrifice of real crews to maintain Imperial deceptions. I included everything, held nothing back. Then I split the archive. One copy went to the New Republic Intelligence Service, transmitted through channels I'd carefully cultivated, with officers who'd defected from Imperial service. They would use it for historical analysis, war crimes investigations, understanding how the Empire had actually functioned beneath its propaganda. The other copy went to Imperial remnant leadership, the warlords and administrators trying to maintain some semblance of order as the Empire collapsed. I transmitted it with a simple message: these are the lies you've been defending. Decide what truth is worth. And then I deleted my personal copies, purged my equipment, and resigned from the Naval Archives. The fallout was immediate and complex. The New Republic used my documentation to prosecute Imperial officers who'd knowingly participated in Ghost Fleet deceptions, treating it as fraud and misappropriation of military resources. The Imperial remnant factions alternately denied the reports, claimed they were rebel propaganda, or grudgingly admitted that strategic documentation procedures had been employed for legitimate security reasons. The families of Ghost Fleet crews received mixed outcomes. Some got confirmation that their loved ones had died in actual operations rather than fictional ones. Others learned their family members had been designated expendable, their service erased from official history. The truth I'd hoped would bring clarity mostly brought pain. I retreated to Corellia, to the modest district where I'd grown up, and took a job as a civilian logistics coordinator for a shipping company. No more classified data, no more Imperial deceptions, no more ghost fleets. Just honest work tracking cargo shipments, the kind of simple documentation my mother had started with. But the numbers still haunted me. I'd dream about fleet movement reports, ghost fleet designations, crews disappearing into fictional identities. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, convinced I'd missed some pattern, some deeper deception. Beneath the deceptions I'd uncovered, 20 years passed. The New Republic stabilized, the Imperial remnant faded into historical footnote, and the ghost fleets became a strange chapter in academic studies of Imperial military bureaucracy. Historians debated whether they represented criminal fraud or legitimate strategic deception. No consensus ever emerged. I gave occasional interviews to researchers, explaining the technical details of how the ghost fleets were documented, how I'd discovered them, what I'd learned. But I never told them the full truth, the thing that still keeps me awake at night. The ghost fleets were more efficient than the truth, by inflating fleet strength through documentation, by hiding problematic operations in fictional identities, By sacrificing expendable crews to maintain Imperial credibility, all of it worked. The Empire maintained order longer than it would have without those deceptions. Systems stayed compliant, rebellions were delayed, stability lasted. My mother taught me that numbers don't lie, but she was wrong. Numbers lie constantly, and sometimes those lies are more valuable than truth. The galaxy ran on necessary fictions, and the ghost fleets were just one example among thousands. The New Republic engaged in similar deceptions, just more subtle. Every government did because reality at galactic scale was too complex, too messy, too difficult to maintain without simplifying fictions. I exposed the ghost fleets believing truth mattered more than stability. Now, watching the New Republic struggle with the same problems the Empire faced, how to maintain order across billions of systems, how to project power without unlimited resources, how to convince populations that governance is reliable and capable, I wonder if I was right. 300 fictional star destroyers maintained peace in regions where real ships couldn't constantly patrol. Classified operations were conducted without public panic about phenomena the government couldn't explain. Crews were sacrificed, yes, but in a galaxy where trillions lived, wasn't stability worth thousands of hidden deaths? I don't know anymore. I documented the truth, exposed the deceptions, and the galaxy didn't become more honest, it just became more obviously dishonest. The fictions continue, wearing different names, serving different governments, but fundamentally unchanged. I'm 64 years old now, dying actually. The doctors give me 3 months, maybe 4. The same heart condition that killed my mother. Hereditary weakness I've always known would claim me eventually. I've been recording this because someone should know, should understand what the ghost fleets actually represented and why I chose to expose them. But I'm also recording this because I want someone to understand my doubt, my uncertainty about whether I made the right choice. The archives my mother dedicated her life to were corrupted by necessary lies, and I exposed those lies, believing truth was sacred. Now I'm not sure truth is anything more than another form of deception, one that makes us feel righteous while accomplishing nothing. The ghost fleets are gone. The documentation I preserved is studied by historians who treat it as curious bureaucratic dysfunction rather than systematic institutional horror. The crews who died are footnotes, and the galaxy continues requiring fictions to function, continues sacrificing truth to stability, continues operating exactly as it did when the ghost fleets existed. I served the archives faithfully. I exposed the truth, and I changed nothing that mattered. That's what I want recorded, not that I was brave or principled or vindicated by history, but that I tried to honor my mother's belief in documentation, in numbers, in archival truth, and learned that those beliefs were illusions. Comfortable illusions, yes, but illusions nonetheless. The ghost fleets existed because the Empire needed them to exist, and they disappeared because the Empire fell. Simple as that. The documentation I preserved, the truth I exposed, it mattered to me, but not to the galaxy. History moved on, powered by new fictions, and my truth became just another data point in archives that future governments will falsify for their own necessary reasons. I don't regret exposing the ghost fleets, but I don't feel vindicated either. I feel tired of believing that documentation matters when governments routinely falsify it, tired of pretending that truth has some inherent value beyond making people like me feel morally superior, tired of serving institutions that consume their believers and spit out convenient narratives. My mother believed numbers don't lie. She was wrong. Numbers lie constantly, and we record those lies. We preserve them. We build civilizations on foundations of documented falsehood. That's the truth the ghost fleets taught me, and it's the only truth I have left to give. 3 months, maybe 4. Then I'll become another documented death, another archived casualty, another number in the comprehensive records that governments maintain to prove their legitimacy, and those records will lie about me too, in small ways, in convenient omissions, in simplified narratives that hide the complexity and doubt and complicity that defined my actual life. The ghost fleets never appeared in official records, not really. They existed in the spaces between documentation, in the lies we told ourselves about our own archives. And I spent my life trying to make those spaces visible, to document the undocumented, to create records of deliberate omissions. But you can't archive absence, you can't document deception without participating in it. The moment I exposed the ghost fleets, I became part of the Empire's narrative, playing the role they'd anticipated, the idealistic analyst who discovers uncomfortable truths and naively believes exposing them matters. They knew people like me would eventually notice. They knew some percentage of archivists would investigate, would discover the patterns, would feel compelled to reveal them. They'd planned for it, built it into their systems, ensured that even exposure would serve their purposes by demonstrating Imperial transparency, showing that the Empire's documentation was so comprehensive that even its deceptions could be uncovered and corrected. I thought I was revealing truth. I was actually performing my assigned function in a larger deception. That's what I truly want recorded, not the ghost fleets themselves. Historians have documented those adequately, but this, the Empire's deepest deception, wasn't the fictional ships or the falsified reports. It was convincing people like me that our work mattered, that documentation preserved truth, that archives were sacred institutions rather than just another form of propaganda. My mother served that deception faithfully until her death. I exposed it but couldn't escape it. And future analysts will discover their own ghost fleets, will feel the same moral clarity I felt, will expose truths that don't actually threaten the systems they're trying to reveal. That's the cycle, that's the pattern, that's the real archive, not the specific deceptions, but the institutional structure that generates them infinitely, that converts idealistic believers into complicit servants, that maintains power through the illusion of documentation. I served the Imperial Naval Archives for 7 years. I exposed their greatest deception, and I learned that service and exposure were the same thing, two sides of institutional control, and I was never anything more than a component in that control. 3 months. I'll die knowing I changed nothing, documented everything, and missed the deepest truth until too late. That the archive is the lie, documentation is the deception, and numbers are the greatest falsehood we tell ourselves. The ghost fleets existed. I exposed them. Neither fact matters. That's the truth. That's what I'm recording. That's all I have left. The truth. I spent my life believing documentation was sacred, that archives preserved truth, that numbers couldn't lie. The ghost fleets taught me differently. They showed me that institutions run on necessary fictions, that truth without power is just data, that exposure without consequences is just another form of complicity. I revealed the Empire's greatest deception and accomplished nothing except feeling morally superior while the galaxy continued operating on lies. My mother died believing in archives. I'll die knowing archives are just more sophisticated propaganda, that documentation serves power rather than truth, and that my exposure of the ghost fleets was itself part of the Empire's narrative control, letting minor deceptions be discovered to hide deeper ones. I changed nothing. The New Republic maintains its own ghost fleets now, different names but same function. Truth doesn't matter. At galactic scale, only the comfortable illusion that someone's documenting it honestly. That's what I learned. That's what killed my faith. That's what I'm recording so future analysts will understand. The archive is the deepest lie, and we who serve it are the most deceived.